religious freedoms contribute to a more peaceful and civil society. My recent work with Brian Grimm, Jamie Harris, and others clearly demonstrates this. But we were not the first to make the general argument. In the 18th century, many of the most prominent scholars recognized the importance of allowing freedoms for multiple religions. Voltaire wrote, if there were two, they would cut each other's throats, but if there was one, there would be danger of despotism. If there were two, they would cut each other's throats, but there are 30, and they live in peace and happiness. David Hume, many others, offered similar advice. Adam Smith echoed this thesis, and he explained, quote, if the government was perfectly decided both to let them all alone, they would subdivide themselves fast enough so as soon to become sufficiently numerous. What these scholars often failed to recognize, however, was that it wasn't the plurality of the religions alone that resulted in civility. It was the freedoms that allowed these groups to exist that diffused many of the potential conflicts. Let me offer a couple quick findings to illustrate this. When using data coded from the 2005 International Religious Freedom Reports, Brian Grimm and I found that religiously motivated violence was reported as widespread in 44% of the countries where proselytizing was limited or restricted. But in countries where there were no reported limitations or restrictions on proselytism, only 14% of the countries reported such violence. The differences were even more striking when we looked at social, religious, and cultural pressures against proselytism. 1/2 of the countries with traditional attitudes or clerical edicts discouraging proselytism had high levels of religiously motivated violence, compared to only 16% without such edicts and reported attitudes. Obviously, our research has gone well beyond these basic statistics, but even our complex models, the relationship between denying freedoms and higher levels of persecution and violence remain. It's a very robust relationship. Now, I want to offer a couple, being a true sociologist and also being a sociology theory, I have to offer a couple propositions to help explain this here. First, we know from numerous historical examples, the stronger the alliance between religion and state, the more likely state powers will be used to persecute religious competitors. To state this more formally, to the extent that a religious group achieves a monopoly and holds access to the temporal power and privileges of the state, the ever-present temptation is to openly persecute competitors. Currently, this is most evident in Islamic nations under Sharia law, but the examples go far beyond Islam. Religious freedoms reduce violence and persecution by, and this I really think is the critical part, by offering privileges to all religions and power to none. No single religion can claim the authority of the state. But we also know that even when states are not aligned with a single religion, they often still deny religious freedoms for all or many religions, especially the freedoms of minority religions. This leads to my second proposition, and that is, to the extent that religious freedoms are granted to all religion, the state will have less authority and less incentive to persecute the religion. Having less authority is important because supporting any freedom involving speech can be a nuisance or even a threat. Sometimes states or local governments don't want to hear what the minorities have to say. Religious freedoms also result in fewer incentives, as the multiple religious groups now operating on a level playing field are less of a threat to the state. But the two propositions just stated only address why religious freedoms serve to reduce violence and persecution promoted by the state. These same freedoms also serve to diffuse the religious and social disputes that go beyond the state's actions. Not only do the freedoms reduce the grievances and social isolation of minority religions, they also reduce the ability of other groups to take action against them. For example, the vigilante policing actions of religious and social movements are less tolerated when religious freedoms are protected. You know, just as state officials often turned a blind eye to the vigilante groups persecuting blacks in the early 20th century in America, groups persecuting religious minorities often face little intervention from the state when religious freedoms go unprotected. And again, that's why I return back to the importance of an independent judiciary. To sum up, Supporting the rights of religious minorities and all religions to proselytize can contribute to the freedoms of individuals and the civility of the collective. Even though I disagree with the vast majority of those proselytizing, their freedoms are my freedoms.